17%, and you better pick a side. These are the two topics of discussion where I'm going to update you on what's going on south of the border with La Maiza and La Chapiza and the four letters, LCJNG, what's happening in narco land. So 17%, this is the probably most important number to know about Mexico and the cartels, but it's kind of mundane and boring, but it's very important. 17% is the percentage of Mexico's economy that is captured as taxes at some level of the government. United States is probably 35%. Mexico is one of the 38 OECD countries. OECD countries are all the countries in Europe, the Americas, Japan, South Korea. It's basically the industrialized democratic country. So it wouldn't be China. It's not every rich country, but it's most of the countries that are kind of like the U.S. Like there's kind of a democracy. It's an open market. The average amount of the country's total economy that gets captured by the government is more like 33%. So Mexico is not really a poor country, but it has the revenues of a poor country because it just doesn't have the tax collecting infrastructure. And of course, people don't really want to pay taxes, so it's hard to implement the infrastructure. So that means parts of Mexico, like where Americans are moving to, are just like being in America, are very similar, right? But while America has rural poverty, but of course it's much more extreme in Mexico. Mexico just doesn't have the money. A lot of these smaller towns, places where people like El Chapo and them grew up at, there's barely any schools, no clinics. So in these parts of the country where the different groups, and there's different ones all around, and Knights Templar and Michoacan, obviously the four letters, Chapiza, Maiza, you had the Caborca cartel up before they recaptured, what's his name? They provide services to the people. Of course, during pandemic, you may have seen, it was kind of famous, they were giving out, people were lining up to get aid packages with Chapo's face on it, with El Mayo's face, with El Mencho's face, and you would get food. They might have been giving out masks, gloves, and they go into towns now, they build clinics, and when you hear them saying, oh, they took over a town, well, some of the places they take over didn't have any security in the first place anyway. So Mexico's main problem, well, think about it in the context of the U.S. What's going on with Republican government? What's the main thing Republicans want? They want laissez-faire capitalism, business do whatever it wants, pay as little taxes as possible. Well, then you get a situation like Mexico where you have a lot of the people in places are so poor that you have these government-like entities operating. So since El Mayo was tricked into coming to that meeting, getting knocked in the head and brought by Chapo's son to the U.S., and now he's pled guilty and he's awaiting a life sentence. Things have gotten extremely violent in Sinaloa. It's been almost exactly a year. There's been over 1,800 homicides in Sinaloa and about an equal number of disappearances. Some of those people have popped back up. They're not all DEAD. So Sinaloa has a little more population than, say, like Chicago's probably 2.7 million. So let's just say Sinaloa and Chicago have the same size population. Sinaloa right now, I think the most homicides Chicago ever had back in the day might have been 1,000. So Sinaloa is more than twice as dangerous as, say, Chicago ever was. Sinaloa's homicide rate, if you count a lot of the disappearances, it's about like how the most violent cities, like when DC and New Orleans were up in the 80 per 100,000, that's what Sinaloa's like, but at a larger scale. So pretty violent, but not as bad as like Juarez was back in like '09 and 2010, where there were 3,000 people just being killed in the city limits every year. So there's a lot of graffiti around Sinaloa with MF, which stands for Mayito Flaco. That's Mayo's son. He's taking the reins. Now, let's think about, so Trump is getting a lot of course, everything he does is for optics. He just blew up that boat in Venezuela, which we really had 11 people on it that he said were Trinidad. Probably nobody on it was Trinidad, because they have no presence in the province that boat left from, or that area of Venezuela. We don't even know, was it a DUR rug boat? It had kind of a lot of people. It certainly wasn't just gonna sail up into the Caribbean. It's really not known what that boat really was. It might not even have been drugs. It may have been. And then him threatening to go put troops, of course, in these retired special forces idiots that are all over YouTube with their stupid channels, and we could go in overnight and do this and kill this and that. But the system, the organized crime system, which we refer to here as Cartels, really has very little. I mean, the violence is what we hear about, and the semi-literate, dumb, violent peasants who let themselves become the famous faces of it, like Chapo or Mayo. They seize our attention, and they're just like the Colombian guys were back in the 80s. They're an easy scapegoat for the problem of drugs, but they're not. Those guys come and go. You really think El Chapo created anything? He was so dumb. He escaped from prison twice by bribing officials, and then he got caught, if you remember, because he let Sean Penn lure him to an interview because he wanted to meet a pretty female reporter. I mean, El Mayo went to that meeting with a couple bodyguards, gets hit in the head and thrown out, zip-tied and put on a plane. Not super impressive. I mean, and what they're doing is not super difficult, but it's what they can do. They can create these mini governments, because back to the number 17%, when you have a Mexican government that does not have the tax revenue to pay for a lot of soldiers and police, and to pay them well, and to not have a big public administration that's well paid, they're very easy to bribe. Imagine if the mayor of Memphis made $10,000 a year and Memphis police officers made $3,000 a year. Well, they would almost have to be corrupt. Well, they would have to be doing something corrupt to feed their families. I mean, hard enough for police and municipal employees in the U.S. to get by now. They're not well paid, but they get by. But in Mexico, you damn near have to be corrupt to even make enough money to be anything more than subsistence. Mexico's income inequality is higher than the United States is. It's a place with a lot of wealth and even more extreme amounts of poverty than here, and that's what breeds violence. The government is weak, so La Maiza is probably, they feel confident they're gonna win. They're gonna get rid of the remnants of Chapitos. Remember when the Chapo's son showed up with Mayo a year back, they were cutting deals, and now the two sons are pleading guilty. 17 members of their extended family walked across the border a couple months back. So the remnants of Chapitos have made a deal with the four letters CJNG, but that's a little more in the north. There some estimates is that the Chapitos have lost 2/3 of their routes and hubs. La Maiza is getting stronger now. Trump's crackdown on border crossings has taken away, illegal border crossings, has taken away what had become the biggest source of profits for all of them, which wasn't necessarily drugs, it was human smuggling. Depending how far you're coming from, the take you from, think like Chinese were flying into Ecuador, didn't require even a visa. You could just fly into Ecuador, and you could, I think there were coyotes that would take you from Ecuador all the way up through Panama, through Central America, all the way to the U.S. border. I don't know, between 60,000 and 100,000 a person. So, 15, 20, if you get 20 Chinese, I mean, you're getting million and a half dollars with minimal outlay. So they feel that actually now trafficking may have gone back up to replace that. So that's the problem with dealing with crime. It's like whack-a-mole. You do one thing and something else pops up. Everyone, the public health officials had been bragging about how ODs deaths were down in the United States because they went down in 2024 from 2023 by 25%. But in the opening months of 2025, they're back higher than they were in the first months of 2024. And there's some new stuff on the scene, nitazines, which is once again a synthetic opioid, which is even stronger than the Fetty Wap. As long as there's people in enough misery to want to try to use whatever to get high, there'll be someone to supply it. So going into Mexico militarily, killing certain people, they've been killing narcos forever. That doesn't stop anything. Now, speaking of killing narcos, this is so interesting for those of you interested in what the Sinaloa Federation really is. It's called the Blood Federation because it was created by a lot of intermarriages, and it helped it last for a while. But Chapo's last wife, the young one, Emma Coronel, the young, real attractive one, her uncle was this guy, Nacho Coronel, known as the King of Crystal. He was one of the first guys to, when Crystal had been being crank or whatever they call it, was being made domestically here in the U.S., and then they started making it big in Mexico. He was at the forefront of that. And in 2009, a body purported to be his that wasn't very mangled and had 6 gunshot wounds in it popped up at a hospital. It was, not popped up, supposedly the Mexican Marines killed Chapo's wife's uncle, Nacho Coronel, the King of Crystal, who was one of the key people in the Blood Federation, which was that tied him and Chapo together as family. The woman Annabel Hernandez, who was a great Mexican journalist, she seems to have figured out that probably Nacho Coronel, that wasn't him. It was a guy named Dagoberto something else. Because you can tell how old a body is from certain tests. Whoever the person was that was supposed to be Nacho Coronel was like in his early 40s. Well, Nacho Coronel would have been in his mid-50s then. He and other narcos, often you'll see that, so-and-so died in a big shootout with the Mexican Marines or police. That might just be their way to exit the stage. And speaking of play acting, recently there was, I think the biggest, like I said, La Maiza is winning against Chapitos, but they just suffered a huge seizure of METHOD man, 21 tons or something. So 21,000, that's probably metric tons, so 40,000 pounds of meth and precursors. Not one arrest. So you tell me that wasn't arranged. Give us something to make it look like we're doing something. That had to be what it is. 40,000 pounds and no arrests? Come on. That was clearly arranged by maybe Maito Flaco. So really what goes on down there is which group can have the most strongest political alliances, and that's a whole big thing. I can do something on one day, but the cartel stuff is really all about politics down there. It's about the business people. It's about they don't collect as much taxes as they should be, so they can't really pay for positions in society to avoid being corrupted. They can't give basic services like clinics, roads in some of these rural areas, and the criminal groups come in and do it. So of course the people are at least somewhat allegiant to them, and the government, again, even if they send the military in there to push them out, they don't have the money to then come in and build infrastructure and connect these people to the overall Mexican economy. And I think Mexico City and the border, so Tijuana, Juarez, Laredo, what's across from Laredo? El Paso, Juarez, whatever the main three border cities in Mexico City account for almost Mexico's pretty much probably 90% of its economy, and the rest of the country, a lot of it is quite poor outside of the tourist zones, and they've kind of killed Acapulco with violence. And I think that Cabo has been having some problems as well. Tulum saw some violence. So I don't think that well, and on another note, again, like I mentioned earlier with the coyoting, bringing people over, these criminal groups that control areas where the government is weak, they're taxing people cutting down trees. Every avocado and lime we buy that's imported from Mexico, which is most of our avocados and limes, there's a tax on them that's going to organized crime in Mexico. They tax the farmers. I think in Michoacan, the Knights Templar are estimated to be making, $1.5 million a week just taxing limes and avocados. It's $50 million a year, or just, you're not even doing anything. You're just taxing somebody because you have the power of violence. So the taxes that should be going to the government are going to the criminal groups. Mexico has very weak money laundering, which some in the business world probably like. Part of, I think, the whole Chapo trial, it came out that some executives at the Pemex, which is the Mexican oil conglomerate, they were trying to put in money to buy big loads of stuff and have it moved over and sold and be paid the profits. Everyone's trying to get in on it. A lot of Mexican business people, that's who provides the cover. And in Annabelle Hernandez's work, she points out that when Mexican politicians take bribes from the traffickers and don't follow through, the traffickers will take violent retribution. But the Mexican business class, there's very little examples of traffickers killing Mexican business people because they don't backstab them. They all work together. Like, they approach the cartel and say, I got some money I want to invest, or put some money into my business and then I can buy you boats and planes in my name to use. And it's an easy way for a lot of people to make money. They put puntos, which are points of sale, in neighborhood restaurants, whatever. They don't do strong arm people, ask them to do it. And speaking of violence and retribution on politicians, I didn't know this, I just found out. Back in, let's see, if you remember in Chapo's trial, El Mayo's son and his brother, El Viceroy, who was running operations in Mexico City, making sure planefuls of money went through and all kind of stuff there in the capital, he was seized and taken into custody. He was put on trial. He testified against Mr. Guzman. El Mayo was so upset that his brother was taken into custody because he had paid, obviously, big money for that not to happen. There was a plane crash on the outskirts of Mexico City where a high-ranking Mexican government official and some of his associates were killed. There was like 13 people killed. Officially, it was pilot error, but the pilots were like top-notch military pilots. Witnesses on the ground had said they saw the plane blowing up like as if explosives had been put in it. That has been covered up a lot, but Annabelle Hernandez found a lot of that stuff. So probably El Mayo had a, like Pablo Escobar did down in Colombia, blew a plane out of the sky to let the government know, don't double cross when he pays off. But he was the victim of the ultimate double cross, and now he's about to serve life. His son, Mayo Flaco, appears to be winning the war down there in Sinaloa now. What is that going to mean? Hard to say. The D-rugs aren't going anywhere. They're always finding new stuff. And unless the Mexican government can increase its tax collection so that it can have a more effective government all through the country with more police, not just police, but where the mayors are paid more, where all the officials are paid more, where there's enough, like, Treasury or equivalent of IRS agents to go into all these businesses and say, hey, you're taking money from cartels. As it stands now, it'll never stop. The country is so interlocked with all this money that comes, not just from America, but from Western Europe, from, you get anything over to Australia, that profits are astronomical. Japan, world is a big place. They're selling stuff in Dubai, Western Europe, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia. Big money. When you can buy something in the jungles of Colombia for $2,500 a brick, and you can sell it wholesale in Australia for, you can 100 at a time for $60,000 or $70,000, which is what they get. The profits are astronomical. They feed the banking system. So it's really, you have to have the will of the Mexican business class to help the Mexican government get more modernized and collect more money from the economy. But I don't think people are going to want to do that. So hard to see a way out of this for Mexico. The violence may go down, but those guys are not in charge. Those guys didn't create the system. And maybe as this wave of guys goes away, the next wave will operate with less violence. I mean, nothing ever stopped in Colombia. Global coca production is at its all-time high by far. And Colombia still has problems and has some violence, but not, it was Medellin was the most dangerous any city's ever been, like in the late 80s, early 90s when Pablo was on his rampage. It's 90% of the violence has went away there. Now, that still means there's stuff that can happen, and stuff happens. But a lot less, with just as much money being made. So look for that to go on in Mexico. But Mayo's guys are expecting to have knocked out the remnants of Chapo's people by the end of this year, probably. Oh, and one super interesting aside, the influencers, the war of the influencers. At the beginning of the year, La Maíza dropped some pamphlets out of helicopters and threatened a list of like 25 or 30 prominent influencers and artists, including Peso Pluma, saying, you help launder money and support Chapitos. And they've killed 8 of them. 3 at the end of 2024 and 5 more at least this year. Women, men. One just got killed. He used to brag about he had been the plaza chief. He had run the whole Sinaloa thing in some state in Mexico before he got out of it. And he had a YouTube channel with 350,000 subscribers, El Acula. If you're interested, maybe I'll do a whole story on just this influencer thing down there, because it's really interesting there. Because the influencers are being used to launder money, to conduct propaganda, right? The cooler that your organized crime group can seem, because they're advertising on TikTok. They're attracting young employees, sicarios, workers, people to do whatever on TikTok, on Instagram. So when you have hip young artists or just popular people, whatever, making songs about them, putting them in their videos, putting up their photos at concerts, talking about things in a positive manner on a YouTube channel. It's all part of the marketing. So, but Maito Flaco, they've knocked off 8 of the Sinaloa connected influencers in the last year. So that's your update. Even though Mayo's in custody, his son and his son's people are going to win the battle down there. But does that really mean much? The spice must flow. Nothing has stopped coming up here. Appears ODs are back picking up steam here a little bit. And with less humans to smuggle, it's going to be more substances to smuggle. And all this stuff Donald Trump's doing, all these threats of violence and military incursions, it's the same thing it's always been. It's just a show to distract you from other stuff that's really going on. Because you can't, if you have tens of millions of people that want to consume stuff where, you know, this much of it is worth $1 million in this global economy where there's huge amounts of goods moving around all the time, you can't stop that. And why would you? Because a lot of people benefit off of it. So that's your update for now on what's going on between Maito Flaco and his enemies, the remnants of Los Chapitos down in Sinaloa, which has had a spasm of violence like it has never seen in the last year. Al Prophet, American Dope.